Hi, welcome to Wellness Week, Tuesday, Environmental Science. I am your host, Jody Ojala, and I am an HSR senior with the Emergency Assistance Team. This is my Lynx Point Siamese cat, Loki, and I just didn't have the heart to move him, so he's gonna hang out with us for a little bit here. So if you're here today because you read my article, Planting Health Benefits, I'm so happy that you chose to add plants into your life. And if you haven't read it yet, after watching this, you might want to do that because then this video is going to make a lot more sense. So in my article, I talked about 5 health benefits that plants provide for us, as well as 4 different workplace benefits that they provide for us. And in this 2-part video, we're going to be talking about some of that research, as well as the plants that were cited in the research, so you can become familiar with their names and what they look like, so it's easier for you to be able to add plants to your home and your workspace. In part 2, we will be repotting a plant together where I offer different plant tips. So come plant with me. The most well-known study was conducted in 1989, where NASA was able to prove that houseplants can improve air quality. And plants do this through a process called photoremediation. Now, plants do this by absorbing airborne substances through their leaves, their roots, and soil bacteria, where they absorb and assimilate these air pollutants through regular gas exchange. The next 2 benefits that I wanted to mention were not mentioned in the NASA study, but I do believe that this is a good place to talk about them. Now, when plants do photosynthesis, they take in CO2 and they release oxygen. And the majority of the rest of the organisms, including ourselves, take in oxygen and release CO2. Now, if I was a spectator looking down at Earth and I was seeing this process occur, the first thing that I would think to myself is that I see balance. The other thing that I would see is it's as if we're almost taking turns taking a breath. So if you think about vegetation and plants, and they're inhaling CO2 and exhaling oxygen, and then a majority of the other organisms are inhaling oxygen and exhaling CO2. So the other benefit that plants do is that they do increase humidity. Now that's a wonderful thing for us here in Minnesota, especially in the winter time, and then also in our workplaces, because a majority of our workplaces do have air conditioning systems and they really do dry out the air. Now plants are able to do this by transpiring water vapors through their microscopic pores on their leaves. There was a study conducted in 1996 that was published in the Journal of Environmental Horticulture, where they observed employees working in a room that did not have any windows, and then they were monitored. And then the other group was placed into a room that didn't have windows. However, they had plants in their workspace, and they were monitored. And what they found is that the individuals that were in the room with the plants had lower levels of stress hormones, and they actually worked 12% faster than the individuals in the room with no windows and no plants. There was also another study that was conducted in 2007, which was a little bit similar, where they observed and monitored employees that were working in a space where they were able to have plants in their workspace or on their desk. And what they found is that these employees had a higher level of productivity and they took less sick days. Wouldn't that be awesome? So now what I want to do, now that we just kind of touched base on some of the benefits that we can get from plants, I want to talk about the 4 different plants that were cited in the NASA study that were able to show that houseplants can improve our air quality. The number 1 plant that was cited in the NASA study is this plant here. I'm not going to try to say the scientific name because it definitely is a tongue twister, However, the common name for this plant is the cast iron plant. Now, the reason why this is named the cast iron plant is because it's literally cast iron. No, it's very hardy and it's hard to kill. So this plant here, this plant was cited to give the most health benefits because it has such a large surface area. And when you have a large surface area like this, more gas exchange is able to occur. And most of this plant, except for a small area on the stem, it is all leaf. Now this is a variegated version. Take a look at how pretty that leaf is. This is a variegated version. I have not seen any of these ones here in Minnesota, and I did find this one in San Diego. But if you were to go to Bachman's or you were looking for the cast iron plant, what you'd be looking for is a plant that pretty much looks like these green leaves here. This is a really great plant to start out with. Like I said, it's really easy to care for, and it's a hard plant to kill. So the second plant that was mentioned in the NASA study are the sansevierias. Now, because I know there's probably going to be one person out there that is a plant person, they're probably saying right now, Jody, they're not called sansevierias anymore. They've been reclassified as dracaenas, which is true. However, in the plant community, people that are in love with the classification of sansevierias, and because they've been called that so long, we still continue to call them sansevierias. All right, so I wanted to show you, this is one of the most common sansevierias, and you might know these plants as snake plants. And this guy is root bound, but we will talk about that later. But this here is a Sansevieria trifistica. Very pretty. And he's probably gonna fall down, so I'm just gonna lay him down. This another variety of Sansevierias. This is a Sansevieria masonii. It happens to be my favorite plant. And yes, this plant back here is gorgeous. We're not talking about this one today. However, this is my most favorite plant, the whale fin. Now, the reason why the common name is whale fin is because if you look at the leaf pattern on here, it actually does look like whale skin underneath water. And then also the leaves tend to have this nice form where they form a tip up here. He is folded in a little bit right now because he does want some water. However, the video does these plants no justice. If you could feel this plant is super thick. It almost feels like thick cardboard. I mean, I can't even really bend it. So it's a really impressive plant. Now, these plants, when you go into greenhouses, a lot of times you see these Sansevierias and they're labeled low light. That can be a little bit misleading, and I wanted to take the time to explain to you what that means, because Sansevierias are native to Africa. And so you might ask yourself, if a plant is native to Africa, then how does it want low light? I mean, these guys grow wild in Florida, California, Texas, and down south. You'll find them all over the sides of the streets in those places, and those are all very sunny places. So the reason for that is, it's not that these plants want low light, it's that they can tolerate low light. And again, just like the cast iron plant, this is a very hardy plant. And what happens is that if you place these plants in a low light area, they kind of go dormant. So it's like they'll survive, but they just won't thrive. But these guys can handle anywhere from low light to direct light, but they really do like that medium to bright indirect light. But they can handle low light, but don't be confused with thinking that there are any plants out there that can handle no light at all. It's just not possible. If you give them low light, they can tolerate it, but all plants need light for photosynthesis. So, for example, let's say that you had a corner in a hallway that there is a window that's a little ways away but in your hallway it's getting just a little bit of light and you wanted to put a plant in there. What I would suggest that you do is, these snake plants are wonderful for that, but instead of getting a small plant like this and then sticking it in the low light corner, what I would do is get one that is about this big. It will stay that big. It will grow really slow. It'll already be big and beautiful. It can handle the low light in the corner, but since it grows so slow because it has the low light, you wouldn't want to start out with a plant this little because it just would take forever for it to get a little bigger. All right, so the last variety of Sansevierias I wanted to show you, this one does not have a lot of leaf surface area, but I wanted to show it to you because it is absolutely beautiful. Again, the variegation on this is like a creamy white green, and then it also has that silver gray color in it. So that's a very beautiful one too. So this is 3 different types of Sansevierias, and they are also a really great plant for health benefits. So another plant that was mentioned in the NASA study was the peace lily. And as you can see here, this is a peace lily. I'm pretty sure a lot of you are familiar with this plant. It's a very common house plant. This one does have a lot of leaf surface area. And if you're a person that would like to have a plant that's going to give you health benefits as well as flowers, this is a really good plant because these guys flower really easy. It's really beautiful. Now, the plant is normally supposed to have all the leaves that are upright like this, but as you can see with this, some of the ends here are starting to curve over a little bit. And if you look right down here, you can see that these ones are kind of droopy. Now what this plant is telling me is that it wants more water. So I would consider the peace lily to be a medium diva plant. Now in the plant community, we refer to diva plants or plants that need very specific air conditions, like they need humidity, they need to be watered a lot, they have to have certain types of fertilizers. You can't just, give them a little bit of light and water them once a week. They need very specific conditions. I wouldn't consider this to be a full-blown diva plant because this plant can handle medium light, which is really great for Minnesota. The only thing is because these leaves are so thin, this one really does like to have a drink of water probably about twice a week. And it's so funny because when this plant starts to droop a little bit, I literally look at the plant and I'm like, oh my God, look at my plant is pouting. And it's like, Mom, give me a drink. So this one here requires just a little bit more water than say the Sansevieria, something that I water in the cast iron plant. Those are plants that I water maybe once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks, really depending on my conditions. But these guys just want a little bit extra water. So not too bad, but again, a wonderful plant to give you health benefits, and then they also give you these beautiful flowers as well. Now I do have another, Loki's still sleeping here, cute little kitty. So I do have another peace lily here. This is called a peace lily domino. And this one here doesn't have a whole lot of leaf surface area, but I just wanted to show you how beautiful this plant is. So if you look at the variegation here, let's see if you can see it, but this silver in here actually kind of glitters in the right light. It has this creamy white variegation with green, and then this gray glitter variegation, which is really pretty. So just wanted to show you that. And look at this one down here. So the final plant that I wanted to mention today is the Dracaena. Now this one is a Dracaena marginata variegata. And all that means is that this is a variegated version of the Dracaena marginata. And you can see the stem here is all variegated. This is another easy plant Usually, depending on your conditions in your home, you can water these guys once a week. And then this one here does have a lot of leaf surface area as well. It's really pretty plant. So, we're gonna come back for part 2. We're gonna repot a plant together. And then also I'm gonna be offering some plant tips. Welcome back to part 2 of Come Plant With Me. In part 1, we talked about the research that was conducted, as well as some of the health benefits that plants provide for us, and also 4 of the plants that were mentioned in the NASA study. And in this part, we are going to repot a peperomia. And the reason I chose a peperomia is because, you guessed it, there was a study that was done in 2017 where they took 24 young men and they gave them 2 separate tasks. Now, 12 of them were given a task on a computer and they monitored them. The other 12 were given a task to repot a peperomia and they monitored them. And what they found is that the young men that were repotting the peperomia had lower levels of the stress hormone. So hopefully today, by repotting a plant together and talking about plants, we can also decrease any stress that might be in our life. So the first thing you might ask me is, how do I know when to repot a plant? And one of the easiest things is, how long have you had the plant? Have you had the plant for a while, like maybe 6 months to a year? That's a good indication that you might want to repot your plant. Another thing that you want to do is you want to go ahead and tug on it. Now, you don't want to break the stem. You don't want to do it so hard that you break it. But what you want to do is tug on it to see if the plant actually comes out of the pot. Now, we're not repotting this one today, but like I said earlier, this plant is severely root bound, and I wanted to show you what that looks like. Now, if you look at this plant, you can see he's literally busting out of the pot. The roots are coming up out of the pot, and I literally had to cut this pot open in order to try to get this off. So let's go ahead and, I can't even get it off. There we go. All right. This is an example of a plant that has severe root bound. You can see there was no room left in the pot, and all of these roots just pretty much started to just cling on to each other. There's a little bit soil, and all of this soil here is kind of being pushed up because it's making room for these roots. And then this offset was literally busting out of that pot. So one thing that I did want to say is that when you first start learning how to care for plants, you're going to have to do a little research to find out how to care for them. You know, like you'd Google how to care for a peace lily, how to care for a peperomia. And I just wanted to warn you that when you do that, it's just like anything else that you look up on the internet. One website's going to tell you to do it this way, and then the other one's going to say, don't do it like this, do it like this. And I don't want you to get stressed out about that, because what I have found is that as you start to learn how to care for your plants, you're going to take some of the things that work from you from this website, and you'll take some of the things that work from you from this website, and you're going to develop your own routine on how to care for your plants based on your personality, your environment, and also the plants that you choose to have in your home. So with that being said, the tips that I give today are tips that have worked for me. So just by looking at this plant, if I lived in Florida, what I would do is I would cut these roots. I would literally just cut these roots off. And what I would do is take cinnamon, and I would put cinnamon on all of well, I guess what I call it is open wounds. So wherever you cut the roots, they're kind of like open wounds. And what I would do is I put cinnamon on it, because cinnamon is a natural fungicide, and it's actually a natural root hormone, so it stimulates root growth. And I would stick this in a pot and stick it outside. Now, because Florida, California, Texas, a lot of those places have optimal growing conditions for these tropical plants, you could do that because if you place that plant outside and placed it in optimal growing conditions, that plant would snap back and just would grow a new healthy root system. And that works in those areas. However, here in Minnesota, because we don't have optimal growing conditions, unless you say you have grow lights indoors and you replicated a tropical environment, or you have a grow tent, or maybe in the summertime when you have a greenhouse outside, you know, except for those rare instances, in general, we just don't have optimal growing conditions here in Minnesota. So I would not mess with the roots at all. With this one here, I might just mess these up just a little bit down here, just because these roots are so compacted. That's an extreme situation. But like for instance, we're going to be repotting this peperomia. And when I first started pulling this out, it didn't want to come out of the pot, which told me that this plant did need to be repotted. And I did break it loose a little bit. So let's go ahead and take a look. I haven't really actually looked at it. See how it's all, yep, there's nothing in there. So all of this is holding together. And that tells me that this plant does need to be repotted. Now, I'm not going to mess with any of these roots. As we've talked about, Minnesota, we don't have optimal growing conditions. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place it in the pot and then place dirt around it. Now, let's take a look. Maybe I can do it like this so you can just kind of see. So this is a 4-inch pot, and this is a 6-inch pot. So what you want to do is anytime you're repotting a plant, you want to go 2 inches bigger. So the pot sizes go 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and continue up 2 inches at a time. So we are going to put this plant into a 6-inch pot. And what I first want to do is I want to go ahead and put the soil in the pot, and you just kind of gotta look and see how big this is, because you want the plant to be flush with the surface. So that's actually a good amount. And then, so what I wanted to talk about with the soil is, if you look, I guess this is a good thing, look in here. If you look at the soil, you can see that this soil does have some perlite in it. You can see the little white things, that's perlite. And what perlite does is perlite helps the soil to not retain so much water, and it adds aeration to the soil. And I use cactus soil for all of my plants. And the reason I do that is because I have found that regular potting soil retains too much water. And so what we're gonna do here is I'm just gonna go ahead and fill in. And what I'm gonna do is place this back in my little handy box here. I don't know about you, but anytime I get my hands in soil, it just relaxes me. This is one of the reasons why I don't have a French manicure or anything, because my hands are in soil every single day. And not only that, it actually smells really, really good. I love the smell of fresh soil or fresh dirt. So just go ahead and you fill it in all the way around. All right. Oh, I have 2 broken pieces here, so I'm going to show you in a minute what we're going to do with that. So what I would do with any pieces that broke off is I would just take off this lower section. And the reason you want to do that is because this is where roots will come out of, is where the leaves are at. These are called nodes. So if you can see that. This is a node. And you could also maybe even just go up one more. And then what I like to do, let me show you here, is I go ahead and I stick this in cinnamon. If I can get it in there, so let's see here. I'll just put this on the little nodes here. I do that with all of my plants that have any type of cut. If I break a leaf, if a stem breaks, anything, I put cinnamon on it. We'll do this one later. And then what I do, now you could put this in water and roots would grow out of there, but because I'm not gonna water this plant until tomorrow, I'm just gonna go ahead and stick this plant in here and make sure that those nodes have dirt on them, and roots will grow right out of that. So that is kind of one of the ways that you can propagate peperomias. They're pretty easy. I could stick it in water if I wanted to, wait it until the roots were appearing in the water, and then I could pot it, but you can also do it this way as well. Okay, so now what I wanted to talk about is if you look at both of these plants, you might think that these are two different plants because this one looks a lot different. But in fact, these plants are just telling us something different. These are the same plant. These are both called a peperomia hope, but this one, what this one is communicating to me is because it is really compact and fat and chunky, this plant is telling me that it's getting a lot of light. It's very pretty. Let's see if we can see a leaf here. Because it's got cute little lines in it. It almost looks like, can you see that? It looks like almost like little tiny watermelons. Can you see the lines in there? Is that on the video? I'm not sure if you can. Can you see that? They look like little watermelons. Super cute. And then this one here, what this one is telling me is that it doesn't get as much light as this one. Now, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily stressing this plant out. What this plant has become is a trailing plant. And sometimes I like my plants to be trailing plants because what I do, in fact, I had that pot hanging up in a macrame, and then I had all of these climbing up the macrame. And that's what I like to do with trailing plants. And so this plant is just telling me that it's not getting as much light as this one. Now there's another thing that this plant is communicating to us. Let's see, I'll just look at these. So if you look at these leaves are pretty thick. They're not flimsy. I mean, I can't propagate this, so it's fine that I break this, but I literally have to snap it. These are really thick leaves. And what that tells me is that this plant holds water in its leaves. This is a form of a succulent, and that means when a plant can hold water in its leaves, we need to water it less. As opposed to, remember when I told you the peace lily is a little bit of a diva, and this one likes to be watered like twice a week in my environment? That's because look at how thin these leaves are. You see how thin these leaves are compared to this one? These ones are really thick. This bends easy. These guys don't hold much water in their leaves, which is why they need more water. But like these ones here, we don't have to water them as much. You could see on here too. You don't have to water these guys as much. Now that leads me to a tip that I would really like to tell anyone that is just starting out with plants. It's the #1 tip that I can give you, and everybody knows it in the community, and whenever we have somebody new that joins the community, this always is a problem in the beginning. Always underwater rather than overwater. And let me explain why. this is what happens, is when somebody first starts getting into plants, you know, they want to care for their plants and they love them. And so the one thing that's common sense when it comes to plants is, oh, plants need water. And so what people tend to do is, we call it in the plant community over-loving. And so it's kind of like, you know, if you kind of over-love your pets and you feed them too much and they put a little bit of weight on, that's kind of what people do with their plants, is that they will overwater them. So if you are found in a situation where you want to tend to your plants, but you know that you can't water, you don't want to water them a lot, things that you can do is, if you have dead leaves on here, you can take the dead leaves off. If the tips are a little bit crispy, because it didn't get enough humidity, this one doesn't have it, but I'm just saying, if it were crispy, you could just trim off the ends here. You could take a cloth, just water, you don't want to put anything else on there, and you could wipe off all of these leaves and get the dust off, so then they can do better photosynthesis and improve what? Oxygen, and increase air quality within your home. So the reason why do we not want to overwater? When you underwater, when I explained to you that this plant pouts, and it does this number when it wants water, if you didn't water it, it would continue to just do this and not have, it would just slowly not have water. And then the second you gave it water, it would pop right back up. Now, you don't want to do that on a regular basis to the point where they're almost like dead and completely drooping to the ground. Remember, we're in Minnesota. We do not want to stress our plants out. But like in this situation where I'm telling you that this one is starting to droop a little bit, that's okay, that's normal, that's not stressful, and that's just your plant communicating to you to let you know that it needs more water. Now, if you overwater it, what happens? Why is that such a big deal? So what happens is the roots are here in the soil, and when you overwater a plant and it's sitting in water, it's basically like the plant drowns. That's the way that I think of it. It's called root rot. And what happens is, when a plant sits in water, the roots start to, they die. They pretty much drown and completely die, and then start to rot. And the thing is that in the plant community, we call that wet feet. And a lot of plants don't like to have wet feet. They might like to have moisture in their soil, but they don't want wet feet. And you don't want root rot to occur. So my next tip that I want to give you is, when you're paying attention to the leaves. Now, it's natural for plants to get new leaves and for them to shed leaves that are old. That's a natural process. But if you notice that the plant is getting yellow leaves that become soft, that's an indication that usually you've either watered the plant too much, or root rot might be occurring in the roots. Now, you have to make sure that this is happening on a regular basis, not just once or twice, because you could just overwater this plant and it recovers and you got a couple yellow leaves, not a big deal. But if you continue to see the leaves turn yellow, that might be an indication to take the plant out and take a look at its roots. Now, if you have a plant that gets crispy brown leaves, that's an indication of usually not enough water. Or you have the plant too close to the window and the direct sunlight has maybe burned the leaf. So yellow and soft, too much water. Brown and crispy, not enough water. I hope this video was beneficial to you. I hope I was able to give you some great examples of plants that would work great in your home or your workplace, and offered some tips so you feel a little more comfortable about caring for plants. And just for a quick recap, the 4 plants that we talked about today was the cast iron plant, the sansevierias, which are also known as snake plants, the peace lily, and then also the dracaena. And just for a disclaimer, caring and having plants in your life is a really slippery slope. One minute you have 1 or 2 plants, and then the next minute you walk into your home and you have a jungle like me. I gladly take all the blame. Happy planting!